Learn whether the singer David will stand trial for the murder of Celeste Rivas Hernandez.
Prosecutors have spent the morning presenting more graphic evidence.
"Oh my God, I swear to God, I'll kill you." That's what she wrote to him. Not a stranger, not an ex from years ago, the boy she'd been seeing since she was barely a teenager. One day later, he was arranging an Uber to bring her to his house. One day after that, she was gone. This is a case involving the death of a minor. What follows is drawn from testimony and court records. Viewer discretion is advised. Wherever you're watching this from, drop your city below. This one's been followed everywhere. A Los Angeles courtroom just spent 5 days going through the last year of two people's text messages, word by word, in front of a judge who had one job: decide if there's enough here to put a 21-year-old singer on trial for murder. On Monday, she decided there was. All of it. Every charge prosecutors brought, including the murder count, a charge of ongoing sexual abuse of a child under 14, and a charge for what happened to the body afterward. He's being held without bail. And the reason this hearing mattered so much isn't the ruling itself. It's what got read into the record to get there. 5 days is a long time for a hearing that isn't even the trial itself. This was the preliminary stage where a judge doesn't decide guilt, only whether there's enough evidence for a jury to eventually make that call later. More than 10 witnesses took the stand over those 5 days. Detectives walked through crime scene analysis from the home he'd been renting in the Hollywood Hills. Prosecutors introduced records of items bought under an alias, and running underneath almost all of it, the thing everyone came back to again and again was the text history between him and a girl who was, at different points across that history, 12, 13, and 14 years old. Because for the first time, the public got to see the actual texts, not summaries, not leaks, the messages read into a court transcript between him and a 14-year-old girl named Celeste Rivas Hernandez in the days right before she disappeared for good. Start here. The night before she died, they had a fight, not a quiet one. It started over another girl. A friend of his named Asia Collins had been at his house, and Celeste found out. According to testimony, she went off on him, demanding to know why he was still keeping this girl around, why he wouldn't cut her off. It escalated fast. That's the exchange this video opened with. She told him she'd kill him. She told him she'd strangle him. She threatened to physically hurt him in ways specific enough that the detective reading them into the record didn't soften the language. She said she'd tell his mother. She said she'd end his career and his life in those words, according to what was read in court. The defense would later use those exact same lines for the opposite purpose. During cross-examination, Blair Berk had the detective confirm, twice, that it was Celeste who threatened violence that night, not the other way around. Berk pointed out that in everything read into that record, Celeste never once threatened to go to the police. She threatened to humiliate him. She threatened to tell people close to him. She threatened, according to the defense's framing, every kind of consequence, except the one that would have actually protected her. That distinction became one of the defense's central arguments, that whatever this was, the texts don't show a man silencing a witness who was about to report him. Sit with that for a second, because here's the part that doesn't add up cleanly. The next day, the tone flips, not slightly, completely. The messages go from threats to logistics, arranging a ride, confirming an address, sounding almost normal. Whatever caused that fight was, on paper, gone by the following afternoon. That's the first open question in this case, and nobody in that courtroom fully answered it. Why would a relationship this volatile, with threats this specific, read out loud in a murder trial flip back to friendly in under 24 hours. People who study patterns like this will tell you that a fast reconciliation after a blow-up isn't unusual on its own. What's unusual is what happened next, and how fast it happened. According to testimony, the following day, Celeste texted him a street number, the block in Lake Elsinore where her family lived, more than an hour from where he was staying in the Hollywood Hills. He arranged an Uber. That's confirmed through the ride records referenced in court. She got in. Nobody testified to what was said in person, if anything, once she arrived. What exists is a text record, and it's precise almost to the point of being unbearable to read. Prosecutors walked the court through it line by line because the exact minute-by-minute sequence is doing a lot of work in this case, for both sides. Now here's where the testimony gets specific, down to the minute. Just after 10 at night, she texted that she was almost there, telling him to open the door if he was home. A few minutes later, he replied, "Gates open, doors unlocked." That was the last message anyone has from Celeste Rivas Hernandez, not the last message in the thread, the last message from her, because he kept texting. According to the detective who testified, Burke sent message after message in the following minutes, asking if the Uber driver said she'd arrived, asking where she was, using her name alone as if that would summon a reply, asking at one point if she was blocking him, saying he was scared, saying he was going to call someone else to check on her. None of it answered. Prosecutors want the jury to see that string of messages one way, as a performance, a paper trail, a man who already knew exactly where she was, typing out confusion for an audience that didn't exist yet, an audience he'd need later when someone asked him where she went. Detective Corey Farrell, who worked this case for LAPD's Robbery-Homicide Division, laid that theory out for the court, message by message, walking the judge through the exact minute each one was sent. The defense sees something else entirely. Blair Berk spent her cross-examination doing something specific. She didn't try to erase those threatening texts from the night before. She leaned into them. She wanted the court to sit with the fact that Celeste, not Burke, was the one who'd threatened violence. More than once in writing, less than 24 hours before she died. Burke went further than that too, arguing prosecutors hadn't shown any of the four things they'd need for the most serious version of this case to stand: planning, deliberate intent, a clear motive, or any attempt to intimidate a witness. In her closing argument, she told the judge that everything actually proven at this hearing was that Celeste died, and that her body was later concealed. Not, she argued, that any of it was planned. The prosecution's response was blunt. One of the lead prosecutors told the court the evidence went far beyond what the law required at this stage, calling it, in her words, proof stacked well past the standard needed to move forward. That's the tension this entire hearing turned on. A prosecutor's office holding up a string of "Where are you?" texts as evidence of a cover story already being built in real time. A defense attorney holding up the exact same texts as evidence of nothing more than a boyfriend who got no response and didn't know why. Both sides are working from the same 11 or 12 messages. They can't both be right about what those messages mean, and the judge wasn't asked to resolve that this week, only whether there's enough here to let a jury decide it later. She said there is, on every count, and reminded the courtroom that the bar she was applying was far lower than the one a jury will use. The prosecution, she noted, had cleared it anyway, by a wide margin in her view. Some background, briefly, because it shapes what these texts even mean. Court testimony this same week established that this wasn't a relationship that started recently. It reportedly began when Celeste was as young as 12 or 13, years before the night she died. That timeline is now central to one of the charges against Burke. Not the murder charge, a separate one, for a pattern of abuse prosecutors say spanned that entire period. The mechanics of that charge weren't the focus of this particular week of testimony, and this video isn't going to speculate on details beyond what's been formally alleged in court. What matters for this story is simpler and darker. By the time Celeste sent that first threatening text, this wasn't a new relationship falling apart. It was one that had existed, in some form, for roughly 2 years. One she'd apparently tried to walk away from more than once before, according to earlier testimony in this same hearing. Before it kept pulling her back. Her own history in that period wasn't a quiet one either. Records referenced during the investigation show she was reported missing multiple times in 2024 alone, and that at one point she ran from home and turned up, weeks later, in the same part of Los Angeles where Burke lived, before being brought back. She was, by multiple accounts, resourceful in ways a 14-year-old shouldn't have needed to be, capable of moving around a city on her own, of staying gone when she wanted to be gone. None of that makes what happened to her any less what it was. It just means the adults around her had reason to worry long before the week she disappeared for the final time. On his side, testimony also touched on his conduct after that final unanswered text. He didn't call the police that night, or in the days after. According to what's been established in the investigation, his Tesla, the one later found to contain her remains, sat abandoned for months near the home he'd been renting before anyone noticed anything wrong. It ended up towed, not because police were looking for it, but because it had simply been left somewhere long enough to draw attention. Workers at the impound lot were the ones who first reported a smell coming from inside. By the time it was opened, identifying her took investigators the better part of a week. Her remains had decomposed to the point that a positive identification wasn't immediate. She'd have turned 15 the day before her body was found. Prosecutors allege she was killed that night in April, stabbed, and that what happened to her body afterward is its own separate charge. Mutilation, tied directly to how she was concealed for as long as she was. Investigators later searched the Hollywood Hills home where Burke had been staying, and electronics were seized as part of that search. He moved out of the property not long after. His team has said, at various points, that he cooperated with investigators. He was arrested and formally charged this spring, and an arraignment is now scheduled for the end of August. Grand jury activity connected to this case has also reportedly reached beyond Burke himself, pulling in people close to him for testimony over the past several months, a sign of how far investigators have been willing to go to build the record that led to this week's ruling. None of that was new information revealed this week. What was new, what filled 5 days of testimony and made this hearing different from everything that came before it, was hearing the actual words. Not a summary from a press conference, not a leaked screenshot circulating online. A detective, under oath, reading a 14-year-old girl's last known messages into an official record in the order she sent them, ending exactly where they end, with nothing. There's a version of this story where the unanswered texts are exactly what they look like. A young man growing increasingly alarmed that his girlfriend had gone silent, sending message after message because he had no idea what had happened to her. There's another version where every one of those messages was written by someone who already knew, typing out a script of confusion in real time because he understood better than anyone that a jury would eventually read it. The court didn't pick a version this week. It just decided there was enough evidence for 12 people to eventually have to. It's worth noticing what both versions have in common, because it's the part that doesn't change no matter which side turns out to be right. In either version, he was the only one still typing. In either version, whatever happened inside that house happened fast enough and quietly enough that a string of texts sent into the dark went completely unanswered. Not for a minute, not for an hour, but for the rest of however long that phone stayed active. 9 words. 11. Waya. Hello. A name, typed alone, twice. That's not a lot of text for the final exchange of someone's life, and it's not nothing either. It's exactly the kind of thing a courtroom can spend 5 days taking apart, because there's no version of events where those messages don't matter. The judge's ruling doesn't answer which version is true. It answers a much narrower question. Did prosecutors show enough for a jury to be allowed to decide that later, under oath, with the higher bar a trial actually requires? She said yes, on every count, including the one that carries the weight of everything else in this case, that a 14-year-old girl who threatened to hurt someone she loved in anger the night before she died was carried by that same relationship into a house from which she never texted again. What the record shows, without dispute from either side, is this. A 14-year-old girl sent a threat in anger the night before she died. A day later, she got into a car by herself, went to a house more than an hour from home, and typed one more message before her phone went quiet for good. Whatever was said between two people about a fight over a friendship, about boundaries, about a relationship that had gone on for years longer than it should have, none of it explains why the last voice in that conversation belongs only to him. There's still a trial ahead, and that trial is where the harder legal questions actually get answered, not here and not by a jury made up of people watching a video. But the record built this week is already public, already permanent, and already impossible to unread once you know what's in it. This case is still headed to trial. Nothing in this video is a final determination of guilt. Burke has pleaded not guilty, and under the law he remains presumed innocent until and unless a jury finds otherwise. What's being described here is testimony and evidence presented at a preliminary hearing, a stage where the legal bar for moving forward is far lower than the bar for a conviction, something the judge herself pointed out before making her ruling. An arraignment is now on the calendar for late August, which will formally set the case on its path toward trial. Prosecutors have also indicated they're still weighing whether to seek the strongest possible sentence available if this ends in a conviction, a decision that hasn't been finalized and won't be for some time. None of that changes what this week actually was. It wasn't a verdict. It was a judge confirming, after 5 days of hearing the state's evidence firsthand, that the case doesn't fall apart under its own weight, that it's solid enough to survive contact with a jury. Before this ends, it's worth remembering who this story is actually about. Not the singer whose name has been in headlines for over a year. Not the legal theories being argued by 2 very good attorneys in a downtown courtroom. Not the streaming numbers on a song he wrote, or the album he released just days after the night prosecutors say he killed her. A 14-year-old girl from Lake Elsinore, who ran away more than once before the last time she disappeared, who was resourceful enough to survive on her own in a city that wasn't hers, and young enough that she should have had years left to grow out of a relationship. Everyone around her should have stopped a long time before it started. She wasn't a footnote in someone else's career. She wasn't a plot line. She was a kid who got angry enough one night to threaten someone she loved, the way people who are hurting sometimes do, and who was gone less than 24 hours later. Somewhere in Lake Elsinore, there's a family that reported her missing more than once before this, who knew, on some level, that something about her situation wasn't safe, long before anyone else was paying attention. They didn't get to see this hearing end any differently than it did. A ruling that a trial can move forward isn't justice. It's just the door to where justice might eventually happen, if it happens at all. She sent one more message than anyone answered. Then she didn't get to send any more. Everything argued in that courtroom this week, every theory, every timestamp, every threat read into the record, exists because a 14-year-old girl is no longer here to explain any of it herself. If you want to be here for how this case unfolds, and there's a trial still coming, subscribing is the way to see it when it happens.